Wow, nice play by Ramsey, 3-on-2. Trying to split the middle. Here's the pass to Gare. He shoots and scores! Gary Gare! And the Sabres got it 6-5. Right between the legs of Ken Dryden, the rookie who scored on his first shot in playoff competition against Chicago, comes up with his first overtime goal of his NHL career, and it gives Buffalo a 1-0 lead in this Stanley Cup semifinal series.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Boland. I see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. This show is created to give a voice to former pro players and personalities, allowing them to share some of the greatest stories this game has to tell. So let's take a trip to the heart of the classic hockey universe and celebrate the history of the game with the select few who actually lived it. Episode 65 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features 14-year NHL pro and captain of the Buffalo Sabres and Detroit Red Wings, Danny Gare. In this episode, Danny takes us through his youth in Nelson, BC, to the rough-and-tumble junior days in Calgary, right through his outstanding NHL career in which he twice scored 50 goals, played in 2 NHL All Star games, and was selected to Team Canada in the 1976 and 1981 Canada Cup tournaments. An undersized and scrappy winger with a wicked wrist shot, Danny is a member of the Buffalo Sabres and BC Hockey Halls of Fame, and his number 18 is one of 6 Sabres numbers to be retired by the team. Danny remains an integral part of the Sabres family, and he's also a partner in a revolutionary synthetic ice product, Can Ice. Can Ice is a synthetic ice surface that looks and feels and performs just like real ice, indoors and out. Endorsed by Hockey Canada, Can Ice synthetic ice is perfect for any hockey player or figure skater looking to be the best they can be and have fun doing it. Now, Can Ice gives young skaters a synthetic ice surface on which they can play 365 days a year. In these days of expensive and scarce ice time, Can Ice synthetic ice lets kids lace up the skates and go anytime they want. For more information on Danny Gare and Can Ice, you can find that in the show notes. Just a reminder, the home base for the show is prohockeyalumni.org, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Pro Hockey Alumni. Thank you for all the great comments and ratings you've left for us on iTunes. I read them all, and they serve as a great source of inspiration. Your reviews and ratings also make the show more visible to hockey fans around the world and have helped make the PHA podcast become one of the most highly rated hockey shows in the US and Canada. Now, let's talk classic hockey with number 18, Danny Gare. Well, he's a 14-year NHL veteran and certainly one of the most respected players of his era. 2-time 50-goal scorer, 2-time Team Canada member, 2-time NHL All Star, a member of the Sabres Hall of Fame, the BC Hall of Fame, and his number 18 is in the rafters in Buffalo's Key Bank Center. When you think of our guest, the words that come to mind, in my opinion, are toughness, grit, talent, and leadership. And we're thrilled to have him today, number 18, Danny Gare.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be on your show. I'm looking forward to chat with you about some olden days, but also some new things that are happening in my life. So thanks for having me on.
No question. You've got some real exciting stuff going on now. We're going to take a step back, though, because it is a little bit related as well. When you look back growing up in Nelson, British Columbia, and you're our first BC guest since we had Joe Watson on from Smithers a few weeks back. But you grew up in a hockey family. Your dad, Ernie, highly respected senior hockey player and then administrator, coach, etc. Your 2 brothers, obviously hockey players, and went on to careers in hockey outside of playing. and of course yourself making National Hockey League. So what's the youth hockey growing up Gare situation like as far as hockey is concerned in Nelson, BC in the 1960s?
Well, it was fun. I look back at it. It was obviously our family. Dad played for the senior team, the Nelson Maple Leafs, and Dad, married my mom, Cassie, who worked at the Bank of Montreal in Nelson and raised 6 kids and 3 boys and 3 girls. The 3 girls were figure skaters and the boys were hockey players. So we were a skating family. I mean, we all enjoyed and loved skating. I mean, obviously the hockey part was, for me, playing minor hockey in Nelson, enjoying, walking down to the rink and carrying your bag. And there were a lot of hills there, so it helped my conditioning a lot, Mark.
Right.
So, no, it was a really good time. Nelson's a real pristine little area. People there pretty much knew everybody. I go back there in the summers. Mom's still around, and my sisters and brothers hang out in that area in the summertime, so we get together. But I guess the big part of my growing up was obviously my dad being my mentor. Dad understood the game very well, and when he went back after playing senior hockey, he became a athletic director at Notre Dame University in Nelson. It was a small, redemptorist Catholic run by the priest, but it really was a real gem to have in Nelson. And Dad started the first athletic scholarship program, I believe it was 61, where education and athletics could come together. And he brought in hockey players from all through Western Canada to give them the opportunity to have a scholarship to continue their, education and play hockey and enjoy the game. So that was really, I got to be stick boys for those teams and saw some great players like Murray Owen, who was the first scholarship player, Carl Chiwaka, Brian Leffley. I mean, that number of guys that I looked up to, and that's really all I wanted to do was play for the Nelson Maple Leafs. But, watching them train, watching them work out, all those things pushed myself, along with my father, telling me, I had to do so many things to improve. I was small. I had to work out my upper body. I had to shoot 300-400 pucks a day. I did that underneath our sun deck at home. I, learned how to box. He felt that I was, again, a little guy, but I could hit a heavy bag, a speed bag, which helped me down the road to protect myself and to get some room on the ice. So Dad was really, an integral part of that, along, with our family. I mean, we used to go out and play shinny hockey out on the ponds and outside of Nelson, and the girls would, have their skating and doing what they were doing with figure skating. Mom was always around helping them out. So it was a great area to grow up, and a lot of pretty good hockey players in a little town came out of there. Greg Adams, Pat Price, Mike Lawton, that played in the National Hockey League. So, yeah, it was really the 60s were good times for me.
Right, and we're going to talk a little bit about that ability to play pond hockey with something very similar later on in our interview. But when you talk about well-known hockey people, and in some of the discussions I've had with both Mike Rogers, Joe Watson,
right,
I wasn't really aware of Scotty Monroe. I hear his name all the time, but
right,
a very highly respected person who comes into your life as he's the coach of the Calgary Centennials and the Western Canadian Junior League. And so you make the trip up there. So how did you first get in contact with him? How did he first see you, and how did you become a Centennial?
Well, again, going back to Nelson is where I played in a Bantam Championship team. We were like the Bad News Bears, Mark. We had to travel back in British Columbia. Is a pretty, spacious province. It's 1,500 miles long, and it's, to go anywhere, you've got to get in the car and drive. And we didn't have, like, as they quote call it now, travel teams, with kids today. And so what we did, we'd have to play off against different cities in our area in order to compete for the championship, like a state championship in the States. This was a provincial championship.
Right.
So the first team we played was Gare, which was about 30 miles. And then we played Trail. Trail always had great teams. The Trail minor hockey system was great. And then we beat them. And then we had to go to Kimberley, and we had to bill it. Trail was about an hour. Kimberley would have been, this was every other weekend. Kimberley Cranbrook area would be about 3 hours away from Nelson, so we'd stay with billets. And then we had to go all the way up to Prince George, which was 1,200 miles. We took a week off school. It was pretty. I mean, it was fun. I mean, we were with the team, and you really bond with your buddies, your teammates, and the parents were all there. So then, finally, we won against Prince George, the northern British Columbia. We had to drive all the way down to play the finals against Vancouver North Shore Winter Club, which was another 1,500 miles south. So, in that regard, it was quite an experience. So, what happened from that, winning that, I got a bird dog, as they called them back in the day, a scout, that watched you play. Mentioned something to Scotty Monroe, who was at the time the owner and the general manager, part owner of the Calgary Centennials, which was a WHA team, Tier 1 team. And they had a farm team in Kamloops, British Columbia, called the Kamloops Rockets that Joe Tennant ran, who was a real good coach at the time, and he'd heard about it. And my brother at the time was playing with the Vernon Lakers in Vernon in the BC Junior League. So I went over and I got to see a few games when I was 14. That's all I wanted to do next was never mind the Nelson Maple. He says, let me play junior. Mm-hmm. That would be the next step. Okay. And I was all excited. So what happened is I get invited to Kamloops to 100 players in mid-August, okay? And I don't know, I mean, there were guys like Donnie Hay there, Garth Malarchuk, Clint's brother. There were guys that I never heard of before. So we had these little bit of a training camp, like a 2-game total point series. We had teams matched up, and I ended up scoring 4 goals in each game. And it was like, wow, I mean, I was so excited because I played well amongst, your peers and the people that are trying to make, these junior teams and so forth and so on. So I was excited about it. I thought I had a good camp, and we drive back with my father from Kamloops, British Columbia. It's about a 6-hour drive to Nelson in the interior. And he didn't say a word. And I'm going like, what's going on here? Like, I had a great, but that's the way my father was. He was like, we drive up the driveway into our house up the hill, and he goes, you had an outstanding camp. And I'm waiting for this whole ride. Like, can you give me something? And then he gets there, and it was, that's just the way his, motivation was sometimes. And he goes, you've got a great opportunity. I said, Dad, thanks. I really appreciate that. He says, but you got to keep working out. You got to keep doing this. You got to keep. I go, yeah. He says, but when do I get to go to their camp, to Kamloops? He says, you know what? Let me tell you something. I talked with Mr. Monroe after your camp. He wants you to go to the Calgary Centennials camp, not the Kamloops Rock. I said, Dad, I can't do it. He says, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Just get ready and get prepared. So I went there. Mike Rogers and I were the only 17-year-olds at that camp, and we both made the team. And, my first year out of midget hockey would have been then, So it was really exciting. And Scotty really took me under his wing. Scotty Monroe, he was great. I mean, he was great to a lot of guys. And all those guys back then, like Patty Janelle and Bill Hunter, they were the builders of, the Western Hockey League at the time. Ernie Punch McLean. I mean, there were some great battles we had against New Westminster Bruins and the Edmonton Oil Kings. It was just, and I'd go home every summer and try to train and get ready to go. So I played there 3 years, and Mike Rogers and Holland were great line mates my last year, and we had some, it was just fun times, and Scotty was the major part of that. You're right.
You had to, as a young man, I've talked to various players who played out west in that era, Terry Ruskowski, Jerry Rollins, Dennis Savchuk, et cetera, and it was not for the. It was not for the.
Tough.
It was tough, and so for yourself, that comes true. And so your very first game, you score, and then you run into Jack the Wolfman McIllargy in the second period.
Killed me.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was funny. My first game. We're in Victoria, and you're all excited. I was 17 years old playing in the night. Like again, I making the team with Mike Rogers was awesome. I didn't know Mike that well, but and Scotty put us in the first game, and I scored a goal in the first period, and I'm thinking, wow, this is good. I can. And I'm dangling around and had my head down, and I get just decked, like spanked. My head was down by Jack McElhargy. And I remember my mom to this day has this picture in a scrapbook of the Victoria Times, okay? Jack hitting me, and the crowd is going, like, their faces are like, ah! And that's the way I felt when I got hit. I couldn't move. I had to, Bearcat, our trainer, Jim Murray, took me off the ice, got me off. I stayed 2 nights in the hospital, I had a major concussion, throwing up, sicker than a dog.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed like a week, of games because of that. And then finally, I probably my first year, that's when Scotty used to start taking me upstairs. And I didn't play. I think I played like 55 games my first year. I had only 10 goals. But he really would sit down with me up in the press box when I didn't play,
mm-hmm.
and just say, see what this guy's doing, see what this guy's doing, watch how he does this, just great stuff. And he was a great, educator in that regard. Like, he knew the game so well. And the next year in junior, I scored 44. And then the final year, which was my draft year, Mike Rogers and Jerry Hall, we were put together, I think, the second year late in the season. And we came out guns loaded. And I ended up, I think Mike had 140 points. I had 127 points. And I broke the record for most goals by a right winger that year. I made the All Star team. We had a great team and great group of guys. And I also, the thing that I get reminded of once in a while, I broke the penalty minutes for a right winger. I had 238 penalty minutes. So,
right.
And in saying the fact that, and that all came from my father getting me prepared about how tough the game was, and I found that out even in the NHL when I got to the NHL. But I'll never forget some of those road trips. You mentioned Terry Ruskowski, Tiger Williams. They were in Swift Current. I mean, those are some of the toughest buildings to go in on a minus 30 below. You just want to stay in bed. You didn't want to go to the game. Serious. The same with U.S. Minister. They had tough guys. I mean, every team seemed to have 3 or 4 or 5 real tough guys, and I had to battle with them all the time. So. Right.
I often when I talk to those guys, and I talk about going in to play a Tiger Williams or Clark Gillies, guys like that, and
right.
You kind of
right.
And for yourself, you're obviously
and I'm a little guy.
You're a little guy in the situation, so it's I look at myself and I'm that age. I'm 17, 18 years old, and I'm traveling on a bus for 8 hours, and I'm going to this place. It's freaking cold as hell, and you got this team waiting for you, and it's going to be a battle. I guess that's the question I ask players such as yourself who went through that. Talk about the fear factor at a young age, and being able to overcome that.
That was a big part of overcoming. There were guys that couldn't deal with it. I mean, I played with guys that were more talented than me in my early years of junior that, just didn't want to deal with that part of the game. And I get that, I think the one thing is again, was part of my father's test of fortitude, or whatever you wanted to call it, being prepared, making sure, that I was tough enough to walk into those buildings, and I felt confident enough that I could handle myself, but they came after me because I was a scorer, and the same thing happened in the NHL. They came after me. They knew they wanted to get me off the ice or out of the game. But I think once you do it, Mark, or not once you do it, but when you can walk into arena, even though you knew what you're up against, once you did it and accomplished it, the best was when you walked out of there and you won a game and you beat up somebody or you won a fight or whatever. That was the best feeling in the world, to me anyway. So, yeah.
Well, as you said,
but it wasn't fun going into it.
No, I can't imagine. I have a now 16-year-old son, and I always picture him in that type of situation. I'd be a nervous wreck, but nonetheless, you thrive in that situation. And in 1974, the Buffalo Sabres, a franchise that starts in 70-71, is making a string of tremendous draft choices. And they hit again in round 2 in 1974 when they drafted Danny Gare. That draft was a year they had lowered because of the WHA. So there were there were more players to be drafted, eligible to be drafted. I have back then the draft was not a big production. So how did you hear about the draft selection?
Well, you're right about the underage. Like I mentioned, Pat Price. Pat Price and I played like minor hockey together, and Patty was a real good junior player with Saskatoon Blades, and I mean we were best buddies. And he had an outstanding career in junior, and he was going to go number one with the Winnipeg, or I should say the Washington Capitals, and then the WHA came in, and I remember going back and forth with Patty through this because it really, he was a year younger than me, and they weren't drafting underage kids then, until the WHA did the draft, and Patty was number one overall, went to the Vancouver Blazers. And I was just pumped and happy for him, and then that obviously pushed the NHL to go underage, 3 weeks after, when their draft came up, which was normally in Montreal. So, that was a bit of a shock because everybody was saying, the agent I had, well, you probably go in the, top, whatever, in the first round and things like that or whatever. And then there were, I think, 20-something teams then, and half of them were underage players. Like Lee Foglin was number, what number he was, but he was the first-round pick for the Sabres that year. Mm-hmm. And I went second round and 29th pick. But, I think the funny part is I look back and, it's funny, I was talking to Rob Ray and the Sabres. I do some work with them on some stuff from broadcast once in a while. And we were talking about the draft, I think it was last year, and Marty Baron was there, and they were saying how they all went to the draft, everybody, how they go, sit up in the stands and all that. What happened back in the day when I was mowing the lawn in my front yard. And seriously, and my mom, and I got the lawnmower going up and down these hills and, sweating and grass all over me. And my mom's on the porch. She's like this. She's going, Daddy! Daddy! I'm going, what, Mom? What? I could barely hear because the lawnmower's just, punch Hemlax on the phone. Punch Hemlax on the phone. So I turn the lawnmower off, and I run in, and I'm all sweaty. Hey, Danny here. He goes, hi, Danny, punch Hemlax. We just drafted you in the second round. I'm going, oh, that's awesome, and I'm thanks. We talked a little bit, and he says, we're going to talk to your agent, and hopefully, we can get you signed. Anyway, so that was my draft day. Yeah.
That's funny. I talked to Dennis Hearn recently, who had a similar experience out mowing the lawn, and found out he was an NHL. And so different times, to be sure. But one theme of your career is you don't waste any time making an impact. So 1974, you make the team. And what is it like going to that first camp? It's a team with a lot of good young players, also some veterans, a team clearly on the rise. What was your experience like in training camp in Buffalo?
Well, actually, the training camp, Mark, was in St. Catharines, Ontario, and I never got to Buffalo. I flew into Toronto and drove down to St. Catharines once I signed my contract, and I go there, and we had rookie camp. There were 100 guys at rookie camp,
Wow.
People, some guys that had played with the Sabres like Larry Mickey and people that are, younger players, all the draft picks, obviously. So they had a bunch of guys. And then they cut it back real quick after about 2 weeks or whatever. And then you go to the main camp when all the guys come in. And, I really liked, because that year that I was drafted, my last junior year, I watched the Sabres play Montreal. And that was game 6. I think they lost to the Canadiens. But they were a quick, fast team. They had the French connection, obviously. They had guys like Jim Schoenfeld, Roger Crozier, was an older guy, but in the nets played well for them. It was just a young team that was up and coming. And I thought, boy, what a nice fit that would be, if I could make the team, So go to training camp, really worked out hard that summer. Conditioning dad pushed me a lot in that regard because he always had the edge on conditioning and preparation. He always felt he'd get a jump on people early.
Right.
Early in the season, early in games, whatever it was, and it was good for me. So I go into camp, and I remember playing, against Jim Schoenfeld. I remember he decked me behind the net one time in a scrimmage, and I see this big red-headed guy coming down and grab my hand. He says, "You all right, kid?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm okay." He says, "Well, get up. Let's go at it again or something. Or let's." So there was just a good group of people. That team, we went to the finals that first year. It was one of the best experiences in my life. I think I was close to Rookie of the Year. I broke the record for points by a rookie in the playoffs. So it was just a really, first year was amazing, and then scoring my first goal, which was cool as hell too.
It sure was. But before that, you, in an exhibition game with the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, the Flyers are coming off a Stanley Cup season. Dave Schultz is en route to a 476 penalty minute season. He's the most feared fighter in hockey, and Danny Gare, rookie, decides to trade punches with him in an exhibition game. What was your thought process there?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I just got roasted last February, about a year ago, and Schultz came in for it, which was great. And it was a lot of fun. We raised a lot of money for my dad's scholarship program, but we talked about that. I brought it up because I was funny. You go in, and I went to Philadelphia the first time with Philly, and we stayed at the Holiday Inn right next to the Spectrum, and Philly, it was like, not to say a rough area down that Broad Street in that area, but it was, not one of your nicest spots. So I couldn't sleep, and Lee Fogan was my roommate, and he had nervous leg syndrome, and his leg would be going 100 miles an hour in the sheets. I just couldn't sleep. I was to hell with this. I'm going to shower and go over to the rink. So it was the Spectrum, and I'm trying to figure out how to get into the Spectrum. Most rinks, they got the Zamboni area. It goes down, so I didn't know where the hell, how to get in. I did finally get into the rink, and prior to the game, we had our farm team. I think it was Cincinnati Swords playing the Richmond Robins. Okay, no one was in the rink, but they were having an exhibition game prior, and I went in. I right off the start of they dropped the puck, and I'm standing next to Rip Simonik, our trainer that's been there for years, and we're just kibitzing here back and forth and watching. Well, I see Fred Hunt, who I went to training camp with. His dad helped bring the team. It was his son, and they were friends today. And he starts a fight right off the face-off. And it was against Dave Schultz's brother, Ray Schultz. And I'm going, oh, this is interesting. And they both get kicked out. They had a bench-clearing brawl. So they get kicked out. So I go to the dressing room, and I see Freddie there, and I go, what's going on? He said, whatever. I just want to get something going, and, whatever. Back in the day then, you want to prove, impress people or whatever. So I'm thinking about it, and then I, just taping sticks and farting around, doing stuff in the dressing room, and then the guys start coming in, and I don't say anything. I'm just there. I'm getting dressed, ready to go out. And here we go out. This is the first game back in the Spectrum, Mark, since they won the Stanley Cup the year before against Boston, right? Mm-hmm. So this place rocking. They got Kate Smith singing. They got this place is just, the Spectrum was not an easy place to play. But so we lined up. It was Don Luce, myself, and Craig Ramsey start the game against Selesky, Clark, and Schultz. So Schultz is right next to me, and I don't know who Dave Schultz, So I go down, and puck goes in there, and I run him right through the end board. So the crowd goes, whoa. And then he got pissed off, and he comes back. Now, I could smell his breath coming back in our end because the puck coming out. I know he wants me so bad. So I turn left real quick, and he goes right, like it goes into the boards like a fool. So now it's really bad. Now he's skating back up, and we're right in front of their bench. He jumps me, or we have a fight, and there's a bench-clearing brawl within the first 30 seconds. So I was like, I could handle myself, but this is the first game of my exhibition, and whatever, and he's just screaming at me, you little, whatever, in the penalty box, who are you, the new tough guy for the Sabres, this and that, and I'm going, what is your name? What do they call you? I go, is it Hummer or Himmer, or what is your name? Oh, he got all pissed. No, that was my first exhibition game. That's funny, though. We laughed about it later.
Right, but a little precarious back in the day, of course. You're just a kid, and you referenced your first game against the Boston Bruins, of course, very memorable for a variety of reasons. But prior to that, of course, you had to actually make the team, and so you're in the exhibition season. Right off the bat, you're starting with Don Luce and Craig Ramsey. Of course, we'll talk about that because that's one of the best lines of that era. But when did you find out, or when did you realize that you were going to be a Buffalo Sabre?
It was right, I think that obviously the last exhibition game, we were moving camp from St. Catharines to Buffalo, and I've never been to Buffalo. I've been like almost a month now in St. Catharines. And training camp, it's a good place I love St. Catharines, a beautiful little town, and Buffalo gets a lot of fans from the Canadian side, which is awesome to see in that area, Niagara Falls and Hamilton. But I get Punch comes into the dressing room after one of our practices. He says, "I want you to have coffee with me. Come on over here." He says, "We're gonna keep you." And I go, "Yeah, all right." I go, "That's awesome." I go, And he says, "Yeah." He says, "So go look for." He brought Larry Carrierian too. He says, "We're keeping you and Fogle and Morris Titanic at the time." Morris was the number 1 pick the year before. So he said, "Larry, I want you to take these guys in, get a condo, and I want you to watch over them." And Larry was great. Hawk was unbelievable. So yeah, that's how I found out about it. And then my first practice, Mark, I'll tell you this story. I've never been to the auditorium in Memorial Odd. I mean, I saw some. We had big rinks in Western Canada, but this rink was just, it was a neat rink because it was so the seats just seemed to come over top of it.
Yeah.
It was like. Right. It was amazing. And there were a lot of rinks like that. Boston Garden was like that, the original. Chicago Stadium was a bit like that, the Olympia, the original, the older rinks. But, and so I said after practice, and I'm looking up like this in the oranges, I'm looking up on, I go, shit, I got to go up there and then take a look at this after practice, So I walk all the way up to the top seat in the oranges, and I sit there, and I almost fell over because it was so steep,
Oh, yeah.
I go to myself, boy, wouldn't this be neat to score a goal and see all these people cheer for you, something like that. So it happened, my first game pretty quickly, so it was kind of cool.
Right, and you're on your first shift, and you're lining up. Of course, you're playing on I have to say quote, checking line, because it actually was very prolific. And so the notion of a checking line, to me, was always a third and fourth line. You guys are the second line, and you're out there, and you're a hockey fan at the time, along with being a player. So right off the bat, you're facing off Wayne Cashman, Phil Esposito, Ken Hodge, Bobby Orr, and you guys have an incredible night that night. What a way to start the season. But you get it started with a goal, I believe, at 18 seconds of that game. Don Cherry makes his debut, so the goal, of course, is remembered even further. But how did that feel? Right, like I said, you have a habit of scoring early and making things happen early, but this was kind of ridiculous. This was like, really early.
Again, I go back to my father, my late dad, and Dad would always say, "If you're prepared." And I knew when I played the game, guys. I didn't sleep a lot in the afternoon. I'd sleep for maybe a half an hour, but guys would be lethargic at the start of games. You know what I'm saying? Because they weren't ready to go, and I would splash water on my face if I had a night where I wasn't ready to go. I'd do whatever I could to drink a couple coffees, just to get myself ready to go. Because I've always felt, especially when we were on a checking line with Luce and Ramsey, and they were so good at so many things, was to jump on the top lines, okay? We were, like you mentioned, that night we checked Espo's line with Cash and Hodge, and Bobby Orr was on the ice. And it was like, I wanted to ask him for a friggin' autograph. That's the way I was. I was like, these guys are legends, okay? They're legends. And I'm like, wow. And now here I am lined up against him, and I'll never forget the puck came back to Shoney. It came around the boards. Rammer took a shot, missed it, and I put it between the legs of the goalie. It wasn't cheesy. I think it was someone else.
Gilbert.
Gilbert. Yeah, it was Gilly. So I just couldn't believe it. And Rammer grabs the puck, and we go to the bench. And as you're right, it was Don Cherry, Don's first inaugural game. And I sat on the bench, and I'm sitting there and look up at those oranges, like I said before, and everybody was cheering. And I just said, well, maybe I belong, because you don't know if you're going to play or make it there. But I had 3 points, I think, that night. We beat them 7-4 or something. But it was a great start for of a year that I said, and a career. But it was something I'll never forget. Bobby Orr broke his stick. He's broken over the the crossbar, and it was just one of those moments. Obviously, you never forget. But yeah, I guess getting back to what your question was, getting started, it was just preparation. It was, the night before I'd start preparing for a game. It was trying to get, going over the roster, figuring out who I'd be up against. And we checked Sittler's line, Lanny, and Toronto and Tiger a lot. We checked, Guy Lafleur's line. And a lot of those guys, I didn't think were prepared, ready to go, because they were just a given. They're starting the game. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, and they were good talent. I mean, they were talented people. So
that is for sure.
That was the edge that I learned. Yeah.
Yeah, and that continues. So it's a successful season for you. One of the top rookies, certainly in the league. The line's doing well. The French connection's in full flight. King Kong, Cora, Bill Height, Shoney back there on D. That team, again, I give Punch him like a hell of a lot of credit, because that was a team that, again, was formed in 70-71, and before free agency and before liberal draft rules, you kind of had to do it. You had to get it done through the draft, and they certainly did. When you get into the finals, of course, you're playing Chicago. I think you might have even scored the first goal of that series against Tony Esposito.
I scored the first goal in my first shot that series, too, against Tony Esposito, my first shift. Yeah, I did. You're right.
And then, of course, in the next round, you scored the first ever overtime goal for the Sabres in a game against the Montreal Canadiens. And all of a sudden, this team that's only been in existence 4 or 5 years is in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Philadelphia Flyers. You talked before about the experience of playing in Philadelphia in the exhibition season, but I wanted to get you amplify that a little bit. It's the early 70s, so fans, just to give perspective, it's that era where the Flyers have ushered in the Broad Street Bullies. It's an intimidating place to play, and I've asked a couple of guys this. Just, you're going to, even though it's the finals and you're on par with them talent-wise, what is it like? Did you feel like some players, whether on your team or other teams, had a difficult time making that trip into the Spectrum?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've heard about the old Philadelphia flu, right? Guys that played in the Spectrum, or the guys, teams that went in there, there were guys that would come up with the Philadelphia flu. We had guys on our team that did it. I mean, it was intimidating. Probably at that time, maybe that place and the Boston Garden were the most intimidating buildings that I played in as far as physicalness goes. Mm-hmm. And crowds. Okay, the crowds were nuts. Like there were people screaming they're going to get you after the game. Whatever. But yeah, it was, and they had the team to back it up. I mean, that's and that was definitely the Broad Street Bullies. And if you didn't show up, we never won a game there. We had a couple of real close games in the finals. I think one was 4-3 and 3-2. But the big reason, I'd say this, and I've always said this, the real reason we lost was because of Bernie Perrant. He was the consummate. He was the best player by far. I mean, he stood on his head. We couldn't, and we were an offensive team. We had 630 goal scorers that year. It broke the league record. So, I mean, I can get the intimidating side. I understand that. But, again, I give kudos to Bernie. So, yeah.
No question.
It wasn't funny.
Yeah. No, he was at his absolute peak.
Yeah, he was. He said to me, I saw Bernie at a golf outing, after – we both retired at a charity event. He said, "Danny, that's the best I ever played. That's the best I ever played." I said, "Yeah, I know. You played well, Bernie.
Right, and that's something. Guy, but sometimes that gets forgotten in these days. Again, we look at the Broad Street Bullies, the intimidation, which of course was a factor. You also had a lot of talent on the team, but of course they had the best goaltender. But nonetheless, an incredible season. You personally proved that it's no fluke. You come out and have a 46-goal year the next year in 75-76, and you parlay that into being selected to Team Canada 76, which some people think might have been the greatest team ever assembled. You could go on and on. I mean, you probably got 13 or whatever Hall of Famers on that team. You didn't get a lot of ice time in the actual series, but what was it like to be part of that incredible group of hockey players?
I was the youngest player, and I remember getting the call to go to it. And I was called a couple months prior, and then going back to my dad again. we worked out, we trained. I mean, he pushed me. So, I mean, we had, I think, how many players that went to that? 35 maybe guys that went there, and I happened to make the team as a top 20 or whatever. I was a rookie. I didn't play a lot. But I got to, be around. I'll never forget the first trip we went to was Ottawa on the plane, and Bobby Orr sitting in the front seat. And I played against Bobby, obviously. I scored my 30th goal my first year in Boston, and he was going down the elevator, and he stopped the elevator, and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just going back." He said, "No, you're not. You're coming to beer with me, okay?" So I said, "Okay." That's the type of guy he was. And then I get on the airplane. He goes, "Danny, how you doing?" I said, "Good, Bobby. Just sit down here next to me." And so I sit down next to him. It's Bobby Orr. Like he said, "Do you need anything?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I think I got everything." He said, "No, do you need some suits? Do you need a rental car? Just stuff like that." It was just amazing. And then to have, I mean, like you said, the Hall of Famers, guys like Lafleur, Savard, Cornwell. I mean, they could go on and on. Phil Esposito, Bobby Clark. I mean, they were just the who's who of the best players. I was just so in awe still and a little gaga to be around them, but it really made me feel important enough to work hard and to be ready, and to say that maybe I'm as good as some of those guys are, because when you're young, you're still always, I don't say question yourself, but when you're around those type of players, it raises your bar and it pushes you to another level. And then I played in 81 again with Rick Middleton and Linsman. So those were that was back then. To be on that team for Canada was such a proud moment for me. And then Sittler scoring in overtime was an amazing feat. And yeah, it was just something that you look back at that when you see having the opportunity. And I'd match that team, as you said earlier, with any of the greatest teams assembled. There was the 87 Canada Cup team with Lemieux and Gretzky that wasn't too shabby either.
Right.
But yeah. So, it was a pleasure and an honor to be on that team.
In 1977, you become the captain of the Buffalo Sabres. Quite an honor. And do you recall how you had how that all transpired, how you heard about wearing the C?
I do. It was Jim Schoenfeld was the captain prior to that. And Shoney was an outstanding captain, an outstanding player, a great teammate, just a warrior when he played. And I remember Marcel Pronobo called us into his office, his coach's office, before camp that year. And unfortunately, Shoney and Punch had some, disagreements prior to that. And in the C, I think Punch took it off him late in the season or something, and that ticked off Shoney, and it would have done the same for me. But anyways, he calls us all into his office before camp starts. It was me, Gilbert, and Shoney, the three of us. And Gilbert sitting there. And Gilbert was quiet. He didn't want any, he was like, Marcel said to us, he wanted us all to be co-captains. And I'm just sitting there listening. I'm 23 years old or whatever. And Shoney goes, "No, I won't, I won't be a co-captain." And then Gilbert says the same thing. Marcel, I don't want to be. He says, "Danny should be captain." Like this, he points to me.
Wow.
And Shoney goes, "Yeah, Danny should be captain." And I was like, "Oh, wow." It was just, I was like set back. It was like, really? And yeah, they go, "Yeah, you should be captain." And so I said, and Marcel says, "You want the captain? You're the captain." I go, "Okay, but before I do anything here, before we go walk back into that dressing room, I want these two guys here to introduce me because I needed your support." And they were great. They were, Gilbert was Gilbert. I mean, but Jimmy Schoenfeld was, like I said, a warrior, a character. And they went and introduced me, and, the rest was history. But
yeah, that's the perfect way to do it. You're getting endorsed by one of the game's great leaders in Jim Schoenfeld.
The players.
And Shoney's the guy I got to know. No, absolutely. So Shoney's the guy I got to know a little bit when I worked in the American Hockey League, and the Rangers we were the Rangers affiliate, and quite a guy and quite an endorsement for you. You're the captain of a team that is, you're in the middle of an era, Danny, where basically only the Montreal Canadiens and the New York Islanders are winning the Cup. It's an 8-year stretch.
Right.
And you guys are damn good. You're on the doorstep. You got every. It seems like you have all the pieces, but again, you're running into a real strange era in hockey. I had this conversation with Rick Middleton recently, and I said, you realize in your peak years, only 2 teams won the Stanley Cup, and the same with yourself. So, we'll talk a little bit about being a captain of a team that is close, that it has high expectations, but doesn't quite get there and get back to the Stanley Cup Finals again.
And Mark, when you say that, I look back. When we went to the finals, I thought it was going to happen every year. We were that good of a team, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year, we had a few injuries. We run into the Montreal Canadiens, okay, like you say, okay? And they go on and win 4 or 5 straight ones. And then we're still a good team, and we just couldn't get over the hurdle. And sometimes it was injury. Sometimes it was just whatever, a fluky goal here or there, like the Islanders. Bert Marshall's never scored a goal in 3 years against us. Scores one in overtime late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
The Islanders knocks us out. I mean, it just seemed one thing after another. And then I really felt that what happened towards the end of my time in Buffalo when Punch got let go was that, our team was fading, the opposite way. As much as Punch, built the team, which was unbelievable, we just didn't, continue to get to the next level where the Canadians were drafting better, Islanders were drafting better, like guys like Trottier, Bossy. We took, no disrespect to Rick Sealing, but Bossy went after Rick Sealing. I mean, it happens,
Right.
But it just didn't seem like we were moving in the direction, and we were all frustrated, when you're playing, you work out hard all year long to get. And we had good teams. We made the playoffs every year. I was there with the Sabres.
Right.
We had a number of 100-point seasons. I mean, I think we had 213 point. I haven't looked back and looked at stats, but I know we were there all the time, and that's the frustrating part is just getting it. We lost a 2 out of 3 series when they used to play those.
Oh, right.
To Pittsburgh, that was disheartening. George Ferguson, God rest his soul, just saw he passed away, went around Kenny Breitenbach and it just happens, it just happens. But yeah, it was those last few years, and then Scotty came, Bowman, and he wanted to do his deal, and I went to Detroit. So yeah.
Right. And speaking of Detroit, in 79-80, of course, you have a breakout season, your second 50-goal season, 56 goals, and we haven't even talked about, because we don't have forever to talk, the exciting circumstances of you having your first 50-goal season, 75-76, and going into the last game and scoring 3 to get there, and unfortunately Rick Martin needing 1 and not getting there.
Right.
But in 79-80, you hit for 56 to tie for the league lead with Charlie Simmer and Blaine Stoughton. But during that 79-80 season, you play in the NHL All Star game, and the team picture, you look at the front row, and you're there with Gordie Howe. And I was talking to Norm Barnes recently, and he said he's never heard anything so loud as when Gordie was introduced at the rink. And talk a little bit about that experience.
Oh, it was awesome. And Gordie, I sat next to him in that game. It was like, and I played against, I idolized him, obviously, and I played against him in Hartford, and he was with the Whalers, and, here we're going into Joe Louis, and I'm sitting right next to him in the stall, and just a classy guy, and he gets an assist in his third star, but the place was rocking, and, it was just, Marcel Leon was on. There were so many great names on that team. Gilbert, Donnie Edwards on our team, I think, Sittlers. And anyways, Gordie was just, I said to him, I remember this in between one of the periods. It's like me, a younger guy. I said, Gordie, I just wanted to ask you, my mom and dad are down at the reception after with my aunt and uncle. Do you think they're big fans, real big, like everybody was, Gordie Howe? Do you think you could come and say hi to them, He said, just look for me after the game, okay? Or look for me when I go to the reception. So, I'm standing there, I tell my mom and dad, Gordie might come over and say hi, because my Aunt Jessie was just a huge fan, so it was awesome. So he walks in, I see him, Gordie was always so humble and, just looking around a little bit with his head down. And I said, Gordie, I said, Danny, and he goes, oh, where's your aunt? Where's your aunt? I said, they're right here at this table here. So he comes over, and what a class guy. He just for like 15 minutes sat and talked to him. But yeah, I mean, it was what a night for him. I mean, to come back to Detroit, I mean, and then we had him out to my dad's scholarship. He came out and played in the senior midsummer hockey game. It was great. Gordie flew all with. Oh yeah, he was awesome. He came out for 2 days. He liked to fish, so we took him out fishing on Kootenay Lake, and yeah, he was just, those type of people you just don't find anymore,
No, I had a unique experience. I've talked about it on the podcast previously, where I worked in PR for the Hartford Whalers and had the office next to Gordie. And the series, the story you just told, I saw play out so many times, where we'd go out and with the alumni team and everywhere you would go. And he was always incredibly gracious. He was funny as hell. He was just a great guy, and what a credit to the game. And I'm glad you had that experience to play.
I got to tell you, Mark, a quick story, because there was, before the game in Nelson, it was in July, and it was packed. So in Nelson, a little town, we had an autograph session outside the rink, okay? And it goes up, Nelson Avenue goes straight up the hill, like all up a mountain. There were kids lined up all the way, I'll bet you 5 blocks, okay, to get Gordie Howe, Greg Adams, Pat Bright, my local kids, Steve Tambellini, I think was there too, and Ray Farrar, whatever. So we're signing these autographs, okay? And that's really the first time I've ever been with Gordie about signing stuff, okay? And he had the black marker, and he's signing it, and he's talking to kids, and then the kids would have his hand like on the table. So he'd touch the kids with a marker on his fingers, like put a black mark on his finger. Mm-hmm. And the kid didn't. Nobody said anything. So he's done this about 8 or 10 times now. The kids are 20 times. And I said, Gordie, why are you doing that? So, well, I know if they come back again, he goes and get another autograph.
That's funny. That's funny.
It was. It was good.
I did not know that. That's great. You had mentioned, of course.
Cool.
In 1981, you played with another great team, with the 1981 Team Canada team, and unfortunately had a less than perfect ending and a big loss to the Soviets. Going into that season, of course, Scotty Bowman's on the scene now in Buffalo, and one of the biggest trades in hockey recent history was sent yourself and Jim Schoenfeld and Derek Smith, and back the other way come Dale McCourt, Mike Foligno, Brent Peterson. So I've got to ask you, the captain of the team, you are a fan favorite. You love Buffalo, and you're traded to the Detroit Red Wings, a franchise that's in transition. And so, what is your reaction to that trade?
I kind of had a feeling it was after we lost the Russians, and I was his captain coming back to Buffalo. He didn't, we didn't have a lot of conversation, communication. Scotty, was trying to obviously do his own thing. And I think that losing that was hard for everybody, because our team was so great. We never lost a game until that final game. And
right.
There were some issues, and I won't get into that, but yeah, it was very difficult. My dad had just passed away of Lou Gehrig's disease. We buried him in the spring, and I was getting married. There were a lot of things. I had lost some money with an agent, so it was just really a tough time in my life. But I stuck with it in Detroit when Mike Ilitch bought the team. I was his first captain, and Mike and Marion were outstanding people, great family. And, I was proud to be an original 6 captain, and I had, guys like Jimmy Deblano, who was drafting very well at the time. They brought in 2 guys that sat next to me for about 3 years. On my right, 17 was Gerard Gallant. I was 18, and 19 was the guy named Steve Yzerman. Mm-hmm. So, those were building blocks. We went and made the playoffs back-to-back, first time in 20 years. I ended up, again, my contract ran out a few years after that. And My back was bothering me a lot. So yeah, it was those years were trying, early years, but eventually, things got turned around in Detroit, and fans loved, the team, and they went on to, to do what they did with 3 cups. By Stevie got to see after I left, and he knew what to do with it. So
no question.
Yeah, it was. I guess it was the building blocks of the Illich era, and I was proud to be Mike and Marion's captain. They were outstanding people.
Right, that's good to hear. And as I said, those years you were starting to build a foundation, and you also it was kind of a strange time too for yourself. You've got a lot of veteran guys coming in over those years. Ron Duguay,
right.
Ivan Boldarev, Sittler, Park. You go on and on. Had a lot of big names. But for yourself, you're the captain. You're battling now back injuries, which seem to be perpetual.
Yeah.
The team is struggling, building but struggling. So here's my question: is that you're obviously in physical pain, the team struggling. You got to see what's it like to going out there every night, 80 nights a year, and pushing through that under those difficult circumstances.
Mark, the hardest thing is when you look at being on a team and as a captain with the great teams we had in Buffalo. Okay, I mean, referees gave you, they all talked to you. They were your buddies. They were your pals. Teams, you knew you were going in. You could win against teams. When I went to Detroit, that was totally opposite.
Wow.
It was like, what the hell just happened here? I know we were on a good team. No, I know we weren't a good team. They call us the Dead Wings for a couple. I mean, I get that. We weren't a good team. But why all of a sudden is Danny Gare now by Terry Fraser's telling me, you can't talk to me anymore, and I'll kick you out of the game if you say another word. I'm going, what the hell's going on here? But that's part of the process sometimes. And
right.
I love Terry Fraser, don't get wrong, but that was just the way the game, I saw another side, I guess is what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe that that's how it was, and it was. So, I mean, you had to battle through that. It wasn't fun. It was probably the hardest captaincy, the work that I had to do to bring our team in and to lead by example. That was the old Jack Norris or the Chuck Norris division is what I'm saying.
Right.
It was tough into
Yeah, it was.
Chicago and fight. No, I mean, it wasn't a fun era. Minnesota had a good team, it was Toronto. But, yeah, those were tough years. But I guess when you make the playoffs, when we did do that, and you saw the youngsters coming up like Lane Lambert and Gerard Gallant, Greg Stephan was a good kid. And there were other guys, but Stevie, obviously. But, and then they seemed to just take it to another level. And, they got more players and more draft picks and more trades. And I was happy for them. I was just happy for them when they won those cups.
Right. And after a brief stop in Edmonton, your career comes to conclusion. So in post-career, you did some very interesting things, a lot of broadcasting work with the Sabres and community work that continues today. You helped originate that Tampa Bay Lightning franchise with Phil Esposito, working in Columbus as well. But I was curious, Danny, when you first retired, 87 or so, so your whole life has been devoted to this. You've played at the highest level. You've been a captain for 2 teams. You played internationally. What is that adjustment like, that 1987 fall, October, you're not going to training camp?
Different.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and I think I'm sure the alumni that you've interviewed will say the same thing, because there really was no, there was no process for you to prepare for retirement. Now the NHL alumni, which is great, our alumni, they have different, symposiums you can go to. You could talk about financial situations. You could talk about becoming maybe a broadcaster or a public speaker, all these things. Because really, when I left, you didn't know what the hell to do. I was fortunate I got into broadcasting because, but there was nobody teaching you. You just went in and talked and did what you had to do. And then I had a restaurant, which was fun. But those things, come and go. And
right. I
was doing a number of jobs, and you just did what you had to do to survive a little, because we didn't make the money a lot of these guys nowadays make. You just, where they live, they can live off of lineage money for years, you know.
Right.
But I guess to me it was yeah, you miss the guys, and I was raising a family. I was building a house out in, you know, in Buffalo, and yeah, but I enjoyed being around my girls, my daughters. I enjoyed, you know, not having to go home to get my head beat in once in a while, which is kind of
Right.
fun, but it's still a transition of the competitive spirit, I guess, is what you miss, you know. And that was probably the hardest, and the camaraderie of the guys, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you stay in contact with the guys in the Buffalo Sabres because of your continued work in and around the Sabres organization. In addition to that, you are a partner in a business that I find to be extremely interesting. One of the biggest problems in youth hockey, you talked before about being able to go out and skate in the ponds at all times. You know, if you if it was like a Sunday night at 9 o'clock at night, you wanted to go out and skate, you could. Well, of course, these days the biggest problems with the youth hockey situation, among others, but in particularly, is obviously lack of availability and the expense. So numerous companies have come out over the years with synthetic ice solutions, and as technology continues to improve, you are partnering in a company called Can Ice. And when I go to the website, and we have all the links on our show notes. The word that rings a bell with me there is glide. I mean, it seems pretty effortless. You're gliding on the synthetic surface. It's a full ice surface, no less, and that could solve a lot of problems in a lot of places around the United States that lack that availability. And I can think of so many applications, but I don't need to tell you about your business. Let's talk to me a little bit about Can Ice, how it got started, and where you're headed from here.
No, and I appreciate that, Mark, because, you know, one of the things that my father, again, I go back to my dad a lot in regards to what he did in his lifetime, was when he brought the national ski team in to train in Nelson, because they had great ski areas. They used to train in Portillo, Chile, and he went up and did an escalation with engineers in the Kokanee Glacier. I remember going up, I was 9 years old, with engineers and looking at the, you know, scaling and how the snow was and how the, you know, the depths and the runs were long enough. So in saying that, he took a skate with a Lang skate, he took his Lang ski boot, and I remember him downstairs in his basement cutting around, because he was a defenseman, he was cutting around to put a blade on it, you know, on a Lang ski boot. And that's how the Lang skates started. I used to wear them. So he was a visionist in that, you know, that mind that he had. So I guess this is kind of where I'm at with my life, because I always wanted to help. And he always was the one that wanted to develop the game and help the game. He and I'm in the same regard and where I'm at in my life, I guess, because it's done so much for me. But in saying that, synthetic ice has been around for a long time. It was even around when I played, but I think I was fortunate to meet my partner, Mike McGraw, who was from here in Tampa. And Mike plays hockey, gentleman hockey. He's been in the sports servicing business for over 40 years. He's done turf. He's done all kinds of, you know, different sports services. And this synthetic ice product came across us from Norway. So we used it for, 4 or 5 years, learning. I was learning how it, you know, it responded to skates, you know, to the glide, the puck movement, all this stuff. And I was ready, actually, to be honest with you, I was ready to dump it about 3 years ago, until I ran into a gentleman right here in Tampa at Phil Esposito's golf tournament in Longboat Key. And he's sitting there, and he says, "What do you do?" He says, "You know, you golf tournaments." He says, "Well, I'm in the plastics business." I said, "You really?" I said, "What do you know, what?" We're over in Largo, Florida. I said, "Well, what type of stuff?" He said, "Oh, we do widgets for GM and some other stuff, this and that." And I said, "Well, you ever done synthetic ice?" He goes, "You know, it's funny you say that. You know, we've had some inquiries." But he says, "We've got this product," he says, "we put on the bed of asphalt trucks. So when the lift goes up, it slides off. The asphalt slides off it real easy." I said, "Really? That's interesting." He goes, "Yeah, why don't you come over? We'll put some panels down, bring your skates, and see what you think about it." So, long story short, I go over there in a couple of weeks, and Mark, I'm telling you, the stuff that, I mean, all due respect to our competitors, you know, but when you push off, if you push off on the other stuff, I'd go 3 feet, okay?
Right.
I pushed off on this stuff. I went 15 feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's how it's manufactured. One, most of the synthetic ice is injection molded, so it's not hard, so you can't get the glide. And this is heat plant press. This is like push tons of pressures on the polymer. So I couldn't believe this. And now we're like excited as hell about it. I mean, we've done institutional rinks. We did our first rink in Old Bridge, New Jersey. It was a seasonal rink. They love it. I've got Sidney Crosby using it as a training center and area in the summertime. Jonathan Taves uses it. I mean, these guys don't have to go to the rink. They'll go on the rink when they want, but they do all their stick handling, all their shooting skills, their inside, outside edges. You know, it's just a real cool product, and I'm really excited. Hockey Canada's endorsing it because they believe it helps develop young kids. Man, I wish I had it when I was a kid, because you could put this in your basement. I've done it with so many people. My brother has it for his son. They put it, and they can go down anytime, anyway, 365 days a year and practice whatever they want to do. And they don't need ice. You know, they can do this on their own. So yeah, it's been really, really neat product. So
no question. And the number of applications, of course, are endless. And because of the community work that we've done here in Massachusetts, for example, you see a lot of kids who maybe are not economically as advantaged or don't have the access to the ice. And this is a perfect entree to them to hockey. Now you can actually learn to skate and actually learn the game in a synthetic ice, simulating the actual ice without all the expense. You need a 2-parent household to, cart you around at 5 o'clock in the morning to rinks here, rinks there. Now I can see this, being available to making the game of hockey a lot more available to a wider demographic throughout the United States, Canada, and the world.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, we do a lot of. I'm doing some work with inner city projects in Buffalo right now. Okay. Because there's kids that don't have the ability, because of the cost, as you mentioned, to skate, to the game or enjoy skating. I mean, how's that? And we take it into school systems. It's very mobile. You can pick it up and drop it off, or store it, whatever. We're doing stuff in Chicago parks, Denver, and even like now, Tampa's. I just sold a rink to Vinny LeCavalier for his son.
Oh, I mean,
It's these areas of warm too. It's perfect for, like in Dallas, we've done some stuff, and it's just a matter of time for kids to have the opportunity, because of like you said, ice time's expensive, and rinks are expensive to build.
Right.
I mean, you can't build a rink under $10 million, and you can do a rink our size, our ice surface on a rink for under $400,000. So I mean, it just, to me, the cost is great, but again, it's exposing the game and having fun skating and doing things that, for me, a hockey player, outdoor rinks we used to go, you talked about, the ponds and this and that, but this is part of, in the age of 2020, that I think with technology and the way, the game can be exposed to people that have not been exposed to, and even the ones that are, they can do it anytime they want. I call them keeners. You want to go downstairs or out in your backyard, you can skate anytime, do whatever you want, and you don't need to be driven to the ice rink,
Right. No excuses. Get off your phone, get off the front of the TV, and get down there and play. So I'm excited.
We're going to have to get stuff for your son, I think, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking right off the bat. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. But first of all, I'm excited about Can Ice, and we'll keep an eye on that. And certainly, we will have all the appropriate links in the notes on the website for this podcast.
Perfect.
And just wanted to conclude by saying thanks so much. Had a lot of respect for you as a player. Just tough, real leader, and it was great to have an opportunity to talk about your career and about Can Ice. And we look forward to talking to you again soon, Denny.
Well, thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. It was good chatting with you. I must say, you do your homework. You're very well prepared. My dad would like you.
The ultimate compliment. You're Ernie Gare seal of approval. But, Denny, thanks so much, and I appreciate it. But we'll talk again.
Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. If you enjoy listening to the show, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show on iTunes. This helps make our podcast more visible and accessible to hockey fans around the world. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for the show, please contact me at prohockeyalumni.org or via social media at Pro Hockey Alumni. The Pro Hockey Alumni greatly appreciates your support.